Welcome to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mountain Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm your announcer, Kennedy Galpin. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Levitt Family Medicine.
Thank you, Kennedy, and welcome everyone to Mac Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the Mac as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. So, Kennedy, what sort of creative things have you been up to lately?
Lately, I've been doing more drawing. I'm here at the Mac today. It's Saturday while we're recording, and we have like a little shorties tin of colored pencils. And
Shorties meaning like little short pencils?
Yeah, little short pencils where they barely fit in your hand.
They're like stubs, right?
Yeah, they're like little nubs of pencils,
okay.
And I'm convinced I can make my way through them and keep them in my little collection of finished pencils and colored pencils at my house because it's just something fun I do.
Okay. Now, you also tend to like whittle your pencils, don't you?
Sometimes, yeah.
Whittle them down. Well, how short can you get these little pencils and have them still work and do what you do? Because you do very fine drawing.
Yeah,
You're very exacting.
The shortest I get is maybe to where you can see about maybe, what would that be, a couple centimeters of the actual color of the pencil.
Wow.
How
do you grab onto that and guide
There's
it?
Extenders.
Okay,
yeah.
so
various extenders.
Okay.
It's a little bit of cheating. I don't want my hand to cramp.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and introduce today's guest. Joe Nolan is the author of Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. His terrific book tells the story of the art punks, art monks, radical art students, and visionary pioneers who created Nashville's adventurous visual art scene in the 1990s. His book offers insights into how this homespun movement, powered by do-it-yourself innovating, came to be a thriving creative community. We're thrilled that Joe is here with us today. Joe Nolan, welcome to Mac Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Hey,
great to be here.
This is really great. Well, your book has been described as an oral history of Nashville's contemporary art renaissance that started in the 1990s. What inspired you to write it?
I've been writing about art in Nashville and the South in general for like 20 years now. And I'd been thinking about writing a book for a while and didn't really, kind of just had a sense that I would write something that was out of all of the other writing that I've already done. You know what I mean? But put it into a book form somehow. And I was sort of loosely just kind of wondering about what the project might look like when I started talking with Betsy Phillips at Vanderbilt University Press. We didn't actually know each other, but Betsy and I have both written for the scene forever. And
that's the Nashville scene.
That's right, the Nashville scene. And so she had emailed me about another book they had coming out, and she wanted to send me a copy with the idea that I might want to review it, right? It was a book of photography by Vesna Pavlovic, who's a professor at Vanderbilt. And this was in 2021. And so it's like it was about, 8 months into the pandemic essentially. And it was like early February, and it was just a lazy Monday morning. And her and I just ended up emailing each other back and forth for the better part of the morning. And at some point I said, hey, I didn't even know that you were, associated with Vanderbilt University Press. Like, if I wanted to write a book for them, like, who would I talk to? And then she was like, what's your idea? And because I didn't realize that she's actually a acquisitions editor, right? Mm-hmm. So she's the person who, finds the authors with the projects and brings them into the press and ushers them through the writing of the manuscript, essentially. So once I realized that they might be interested in doing something, then I started thinking more seriously about what I would write. And it ultimately came to me that, like, when you look at institutions like we've been talking about this morning, like the Frist or Cheekwood and places like that, you can find plenty of information about their stories, even just on their own websites. Commercial galleries, it's kind of the same thing. But I started to realize all these other things were these artist-led programs and these artist-led spaces and these, weird, art sales people had done in their yards and things like this. None of that stuff was documented. And a lot of the stuff that happened in the 90s was before the internet. So you just simply can't find it. And I started to think about it and I started saying, well, wait a second, none of this stuff is even, there's nowhere to find these stories. So I started to put together the idea of like, is there enough here to write a book about? And then when I realized that because that information is so hard to track down, that as the author, I was going to have to find that information by doing tons of interviews. And as soon as I realized I was going to have to do all those interviews, I thought, well, why would I rewrite all those interviews, to write a book by Joe Nolan, telling everybody what these stories are, when I could actually just take all those interviews and edit them into the stories from the point of view of all these different people who are actually part of this. And once I came up with that idea for an oral history, that's when it really clicked for me. And I was like, this is a great idea. So I love oral histories and oral biographies and things like that. So when I realized I could, put together a book like that, I think part of it was the pandemic too. I just had the sense of like, do I want to have, 50 phone conversations with, all these people I've known throughout the years and talk about the old art scene days? I was kind of like, yeah, that sounds great. I would love to do that. So, and luckily everybody else seemed, there was very few people who didn't participate. Everybody I talked to pretty much was really excited about the idea of getting interviewed and talking about, these different projects they had been a part of. So it was really fun.
Okay. Well, the subtitle of the book is The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. Mm-hmm. Is the reason the story was untold, or maybe unavailable because we didn't have the internet, or were there other things that were involved?
I think that's a big part of it, is just that, like, for instance, The Fugitive, happened right around the time the internet was really first, late 90s is when the thing started happening. I'm thinking of not The Fugitive, but Untitled, which was a sort of a group that put up a lot of pop-up shows in Nashville, because essentially there was very few galleries at that time, and the galleries that did exist were pretty much like, if you didn't already have a following or if you didn't already have an MFA, there was barriers to entry for like the young art punks in Nashville. And they finally just got fed up and said, we don't need your gallery, we don't need your museum, we'll just do it ourselves and figure out how to put on the shows that we want to put on the way we want to put them on. And a lot of the things that came after that, The Fugitive, Ruby Green Gallery, all those people had been part of Untitled first, and I think Untitled really is this place where, where the whole idea that we could build the art scene we wanted to be a part of ourselves was born, Mm-hmm. So, but that's a bunch of just like weird young kids doing art shows in abandoned spaces, or like they'd get like a Friday night at like a music venue or something, and they'd like literally roll in the walls and hang up the art and put on these shows, and then they'd be disappeared the next day. So it was hard. It's a hard thing. Those projects were very ephemeral in a way, you know what I mean? And they kind of came and went, like literally and figuratively, So I think that was part of it, is that it was just hard to pin down, like, well, who were the people behind that, and where did they show the art exactly? If you weren't there for it, you don't know, Right. So I think that was a big part of it. And a lot of it's just that these things came and went, and they were super important, but they were gone. And there was an art space in the May Hosiery building that was called Suplex Gallery that did some great shows, but it literally only lasted for like 18 months. And if you weren't here, you wouldn't even know about it, So that was part of it. It's just, it was all DIY. It was impermanent, you know what I mean? And you have to know who to ask, and luckily I knew who to ask.
We're speaking with Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. We'll be back after this important message.
At Levitt Family Medicine, we believe that health is more than just physical. It's emotional, mental, and even creative. Engaging with the arts has been shown to reduce stress, improve mood, and support overall well-being. Whether it's painting, listening to music, or attending a local art event, the arts offer a powerful way to heal, connect, and thrive. As proud supporters of the arts in our community, we encourage you to make creativity a part of your wellness routine. Your health isn't just our priority, it's our passion. Learn more about our approach to care at LevittFamilyMedicine.com. Levitt Family Medicine. Compassionate care, whole person health.
We're back with Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. Well, one thing that I found interesting, I don't know how this plays into the art scene that developed in the 1990s, but you start the book with a chapter on Nashville's art legacy, its modern art legacy, and you go back to the 30s.
Yeah.
And this legacy was rooted in Nashville's black community during the Jim Crow era. You have the legacy of sculptures by William Edmondson, the Fisk Art Department under Aaron Douglas, the renowned Stieglitz collection at the Fisk. Is the black origin of that modern art scene part of why maybe some of this story was untold at one time? I
think that early part for sure, and in the book, I believe it was actually when I was talking to Jamal, I'm going to forget his name at Fisk, Jamal Sheets. When I was talking to him, he was the one who was giving me all this deep history of Fisk and Aaron Douglas and all that stuff, because he's the expert stuff. But and when I was talking to him, and also when I was talking to I believe Michael McBride, we were talking about the fact that that stuff is all happening. The way I think about it, a lot of that stuff's happening during the Jim Crow era, right? So you literally have this total cultural separation between black Nashville and white Nashville. So when some like fantastic, amazing thing is happening in the black part of town, like literally how much of that how much does the white part of town even know that's going on, Yeah,
the white part of this town maybe didn't know, but New York knew,
right.
At least when it came to Edmondson, right?
Yeah. And that was because there were local art collectors and things who just found Edmondson, white collectors, right? Who found Edmondson and said, whoa, this stuff's amazing, started collecting him and sort of connected him to these bigger, networks where he could become, the
so he interestingly became an international artist in a way before he became a local artist.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Really weird.
Yeah, it's very weird. Yeah, but no, I think that's a huge part of why a lot of that story isn't known, and that's one of the reasons why I keep talking about what happened in the '90s as a renaissance, because I kept wanting to make the point that it wasn't like Nashville didn't have any art history.
But our Middle Ages were just like in the Jim Crow era.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. There was like a period where people just don't know what happened then, and it's like, well, you got to go back and find it. But what happened was Nashville got plugged right into the heart of modernism, vis-a-vis all of these refugees from the Harlem Renaissance coming down, because Aaron Douglas was like the preeminent artist of that time, and when he got connected to Fisk, he started inviting all these people through, and then the Depression happens, and a lot of those artists ended up touring around the South in general, going to all these different HBCUs and stuff. So there's a whole book there, by the way, like the whole story of how these black artists from the Harlem Renaissance brought modernism throughout the South vis-a-vis the HBCUs. So, but Nashville was one of those places for sure.
Right. Well, what was Nashville's art scene like before the 1990s? I'd just be interested to know, because we're going to do an artist talk after the podcast. And there are going to be artists here. They're going to want to know that and want to know how they can live in this, work in this environment today.
Yeah. So basically it was just, there was less happening. Like there was very few art galleries, to the degree that there were art galleries happening. They were one of the biggest art galleries that happened before the era of the Arts Company downtown, Cumberland Gallery in Green Hills, and Zeitgeist Gallery, which started in Cummins Station, right? That was like the big three contemporary galleries that were happening in the 90s when this all started to go on. But before that, one of the only galleries that was even really doing a thing was, what was the name of that gallery? Zimmer and Saturn? Saturn Zimmer? It was Nancy's Saturn and the other woman, I can't remember her first name, but Saturn and Zimmer had a gallery on 2nd Avenue, I want to say. It was downtown. But that gallery was known for the fact that they were super connected to like artists in New York. So their whole thing was, we're bringing like legit modern art, to Nashville. That was their thing. Their thing wasn't, we're cultivating emerging artists in our own city. Like, they had no interest in doing that. They wanted to bring high-end established art to Nashville for high-end collectors, which is a better business plan probably. But see, that was the difference, is that you had all these young, hungry, excited artists who wanted to be a part of all that. And it was a real miscommunication happening between that group and the established commercial venues. So that was, I think that's the biggest thing, is that there was no sense that Nashville could have its own art scene and with its own artists, locally speaking. It was all about, wealthy collectors who bought stuff from New York.
That's very interesting, because I think the performing arts scene was actually similar to that in a lot of ways. When Martha Ingram first built the old TPAC, Tennessee Performing Arts Center, she called a person that she knew, one of her reporter friends at the Wall Street Journal, and said, "Look what I've done.
Yeah.
Look what I've done. You want to come down and write about it for the rest of the world?" And he was like, "Well, what do you got in there?"
Yeah.
And it was like, well, it was basically a place where they showed, traveling Broadway shows.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
He says, well, we can see that here in New York. We don't need to come down to Nashville. Call me when you actually have an opera company.
Yeah.
Call me when you have you're doing real stuff.
Yeah.
That's uniquely Nashville.
Right.
And so obviously, the rest of Nashville's arts community was born after that.
Yeah.
So I guess it's something similar with the visual arts.
Yeah. It sounds like, obviously Nashville's been a place forever where people come for music. They come here to be a musician and play music.
Right.
And there's 100 young people arriving today with their guitars who are here to do music, and there's that opportunity. But as far as visual art went, there wasn't any sense that you could be an artist based in Nashville. There just wasn't really going on outside of, the establishment of Nashville at that point, very small. You're talking about just a few artists, like Alan McGuire, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who was probably the most established artist you could be, getting a big public contract to do huge sculptures and things like that. And, you had faculty at Vanderbilt and things like this. So that was really the art scene, was museum professionals and professors, that was pretty much it, and again, that part of that, all that academic influence was part of what was getting in the way of these young kids trying to do what they wanted to do, because they didn't go to art school.
Right. Well, it's interesting. You're talking about all these young people coming here, and the Renaissance that you write about coincided with Nashville's rise in general as an it city.
Yeah.
And I assume that the art Renaissance and the it city status are maybe related a bit. Creative people, like to be around other creative people. What do you think? Is it sort of a part and parcel of the same thing?
I think so. I think they're the same, and I think they've definitely fueled each other. Nashville's definitely gone through several phases where suddenly, where did all these New Yorkers come from? Where did all these Californians come from? You know what I mean? You have all these people coming, and a lot of those people are music people or entertainment business people and things like that. But a lot of that's also been influxes of people who've come here and opened galleries, or come here and start and brought their art practice with them or whatever. So it's definitely been a fuel for the fire in terms of, people, like we were saying before, Nashville's really become a place now where people, the expense of New York or the expense of California or whatever it might be, for all the reasons why somebody realizes, wait a second, I could be living my quiet little country life in Nashville and still do my work. You know what I mean? So it definitely, the growth of Nashville has influenced it a lot, for sure.
Right. Well, and the urbanologist Richard Florida actually wrote about that. He coined the term the Nashville effect.
The Nashville effect?
That's what he coined. He wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class.
Oh, okay.
And
I remember that title.
The Nashville effect, he was referring to music, but they had, just once you start having more and more different kinds of music located here, the growth in the music industry has just been exponential. There's been more growth in the Nashville commercial music industry in the last 25 years than there has been in Los Angeles and New York.
Oh, wow.
So, the story I tell all the time, I did an interview with Peter Frampton for Nashville Arts Magazine some years ago, and he moved here in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And I talked to him about this. What prompted you to move here? Partly it was family. His wife's relatives live close by.
Oh, okay.
But he also, he said that when I told people I was moving to Nashville, they were saying, "Are you crazy? Why are you moving to Nashville?" And then I said, "Well, what do they say now?" He says, "Well, now they all live here."
Exactly. They all followed him. Right?
Yeah. So it's that's just the Nashville effect. It's almost gravitational. if all the publishing, all the good musicians,
Right.
all the good songwriters, if everything's here,
Yeah.
then he's going to attract other artists. And if just other artists are here, they want to be around other creative people.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that's something similar has happened in the art world for sure.
Yeah, definitely. We're speaking with Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. We'll be back after this important message.
Levitt Family Medicine reminds us that making art is more than just creative expression. It's a powerful path to better health and wellness. Whether it's painting, dancing, writing, or playing music, art can reduce stress, ease anxiety, and even help manage chronic pain. Studies show that engaging in the arts boosts mental clarity, emotional resilience, and connection with others. So the next time you pick up a paintbrush, join a dance class, or lose yourself in a favorite song, remember you're not just making art. You're making space to heal, grow, and thrive. Art heals. Art connects. Art matters. This message is brought to you by Levitt Family Medicine, reminding you to nourish your creativity and your well-being. Find them online at levittfamilymedicine.com.
We're back with Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. Well, you mentioned Untitled Artist Group, and I'd just like to maybe have you expound on that a little bit more, because they, among other things, I think you point out in the book that one of the most important things they did is they got rid of the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
For the most part. Is that the thing that was holding the young people back?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it definitely was. And I think it was also, it just took that group to sort of just offer, proof of concept to say, like, you can go to a venue and you can ask them if they want to have an art show, and they might say yes, and if they do, then there's you can bring the art, and do this and do that. And they really sort of created, like I said, like this proof of concept of, like, we don't have to wait to get into these official places with these official people. We can make any place an art exhibition for a night. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And once they started doing that, it, first of all, just told everybody else, like, hey, wait, we can do that too. Like, that's, once you see it, you realize, okay, that's not that hard, Right. And it was important too, because even in art school nowadays, kids don't learn about how to organize and promote, and even the nuts and bolts, literally, of installing an art show. Mm-hmm. They don't learn any of that stuff. So it was an important training ground too, because the kids who became a part of Untitled and put those shows together, they learned how to do all that stuff. They learned how to promote it. They learned how to, hang your painting straight. What is the center line and all that kind of stuff you need to know to make a good looking gallery, mm-hmm. especially in a place that's not a gallery. Like, how do you pull that off?
Like a warehouse or something.
Yeah, exactly.
So they learned from the ground up.
Yeah, totally.
How to be professional artists.
100%. And like I said, it was really the place where Greg Pond and Brian Hunter met in Untitled, right? And then they found The Fugitive, right?
And that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Was who were these founding fathers and founding mothers of this Renaissance?
Yeah.
So the name that pops up in my mind is maybe the most prominent to me is Lane York. But who are these folks?
Yeah, well, Lane York definitely goes all the way back to Untitled, and was heavily involved with them. Was heavily involved with The Fugitive. An important person still to this day in Nashville's art scene.
Yeah.
So he's the the mayor of Art Town, as we call him. So he's definitely one. There's a guy named Richard Mitchell who was a little bit older than the rest of us at that time. It still is, but but he was a little bit older than us then, and was also a little smarter than most of us, because he was like he was a computer guy before everybody had computers. You know what I mean? And so he was. I think his actual training was as an accountant or something. So he brought a lot of business sensibility to Untitled. So the first version of Untitled sort of like comes and goes, because it's just a bunch of crazy people doing this crazy thing, and it's very unstable. So that sort of falls apart after a few shows. But then at some point, the group sort of got back together, and they at some point they had like actually accumulated like a little bit of money in a fund, right? Because basically if you wanted to be involved in the show, that was part of it, is like you have to like kick in $5 or something to pay for the keg or whatever, and so they had established like a little kitty of money, and the group had all broken up and everything, and then somebody made a phone call and said, hey, we've got these resources, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? Because because we have to do something with it, but it's not technically mine. So what should we do? So they all got back together and had a meeting and said, we should keep this going and we should really do it, but we should get organized and do it correctly. And so then Richard Mitchell became a really big force at that point, because he brought a lot of just basic business understanding, know-how. Everybody trusted that Richard wouldn't steal the money, So that was a big part of it. Was people started doing that, and he was also the guy who, when the internet really did start to happen, he was the one who was like putting out the word via like bulletin boards and things like that. And before you know it, they had people coming from all over the South was showing up at these Untitled shows because they were hearing about it because of Richard, right? So he was a really important guy. I mentioned Brian Hunter and Greg Pond. They started The Fugitive, which was an art gallery that also had studio spaces in a horrible warehouse building over on Houston Street.
And that was my next question too.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear a little bit about Fugitive, because one of the things I think about with places like that are those studio spaces.
Yeah.
Because they're like incubators of the new art, right?
100%.
So
yeah.
tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so that's why I would say that they get that founding father sort of title, because so many of the artists who started in those spaces at The Fugitive have now gone on to be the names that we all know. So they started that space in I want to say it was like the very late-ish 90s, early 2000s, right? Mm-hmm. And Greg had graduated from the MFA program at University of Georgia, and he came to Nashville basically because he tells the story in the book that he came here because he met a girl, and then as soon as he got here, they basically broke up. And then he was like, well, maybe I'll stay here. It's a good story. Then. Maybe I'll stick around. Maybe I'll see what's happening here. So he was able to get a hold of this space over on Houston Street in Wedgwood, Houston, and that was another thing about The Fugitive was it was one of the first art spaces in that part of town, right? So at that point, it was all just rundown, small warehouses and machine shops and things like that. Nothing. It had been residential at some point, but there wasn't that much like residential development or anything going on at that time. It previously had been, agriculture. It had been cows out in the fields out that way. But so it was a part of the city that now is known as really the center of the contemporary art scene, and it's full of breweries and distilleries and everything, restaurants and everything.
Radio station WXNA.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything's there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Everything's there. And so it's like, it's one of those, it's become like this whole cultural hub. And I mean, by my estimation, that happened because places like The Fugitive did it on a shoestring and sort of showed people, hey, there's these spaces that could be transformed into creative, cultural, happening stuff, especially if you're a developer with a lot of money.
Yeah, it's kind of like what the Lower East Side of Manhattan would have been back in the 1960s.
100%. Yeah, and it's very much that. That's something that Nashville has struggled with, just like those places in New York, where it's like you have these undeveloped places that the artists then sort of breathe new life into, and then that brings in the development, and then that kicks the artists out because they can't afford to be there anymore.
Like Philip Glass and Chuck Close come in there and just make it the coolest place on earth.
Yeah.
And then now everybody wants to be there.
Yeah. And now they have to leave, So that Nashville nobody understands how to deal with those growing pains, but it was really places like The Fugitive that really got a lot of people looking at that part of town as like, maybe it's not an eyesore, maybe it's actually a amazing, place that's just waiting to be revived, So they were super important as well. And like, many of the artists who were there, have gone on to do all sorts of things. Hans Matson was one of the early artists there. Patrick DeGuire, Jeff Danley, Jack Ryan, and a number of other people all started there. And Jack, a lot of these folks end up being like the early faculty during the time when Watkins was developing into a baccalaureate program, and then later on into the master's degree program. And there was all this cross pollination between the Watkins faculty and a place
which was my next question, but I was going to.
How am I anticipating all these questions?
He anticipates all my questions. Just somebody share my questions. But actually, before you go into that, I just have to say a little bit more about Wedgwood, Houston. I mean, the vibrancy of that place today. Is the energy for me is hard to describe. I can remember a few years ago agreeing to be a substitute DJ for a friend of mine on a Saturday night. You know, it was Carissa Stolting had her show, and I came down there to do the show, and I swear I could not find a place to park.
I know, isn't it insane?
I mean, it was just like everybody was everywhere. It was almost like someplace in Harvard Square in Boston on a Saturday night. I mean, every young person, you know, who was hip and cool and had something, you know, really interesting to do, they seemed to all be just at the packing plant. You know, it was amazing. So the energy that, I mean, and I think that's maybe part of the power and the importance of what you're writing about is just the creativity and the energy that it brings. It's hard to find that. I mean, that's one of the things I think that makes Nashville an it city.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's funny that you say that, because the first thing that I think about when you start talking about the, you know, what it's like to go down to Wedgwood, Houston on the first Saturday when all the art openings are happening and stuff, the feeling of that versus what it used to be like when you would drive down there to go to the new opening at the Fugitive. It's like there was nobody down there. Half the streetlights weren't working. You had to be real careful because it was dangerous to be there. There was stray dogs running through the street. There's stories in the book about the wild stray dogs of Wedgwood, Houston. And so it's like, it was, and like literally you'd have to like, I remember like if you were at the art opening and like if some young woman was going to like leave and, you know, take off or whatever, always somebody would like walk her out, right? Because there was always like, just like, you know, homeless people and stuff running around the streets. No, I don't know that anyone ever got mugged or anything, but there was always that sense of like, you have to be careful, you know? So that was a very different scene back then. There's plenty of parking, I can tell you that.
Yeah. We're speaking with Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. We'll be back after this important message.
At Levitt Family Medicine, we believe that health is more than just physical. It's emotional, mental, and even creative. Engaging with the arts has been shown to reduce stress, improve mood, and support overall well-being. Whether it's painting, listening to music, or attending a local art event, the arts offer a powerful way to heal, connect, and thrive. As proud supporters of the arts in our community, we encourage you to make creativity a part of your wellness routine. Your health isn't just our priority, it's our passion. Learn more about our approach to care at LevittFamilyMedicine.com. Levitt Family Medicine. Compassionate care, whole person health.
We're back with Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. Let's go on to Watkins then. What was the role that Watkins played in this Renaissance? I know it's half the people I know who were involved in arts were either seem to have taught there or studied there at one time or another.
I know, it's crazy. So Watkins, for people who are, you know, don't know about it, Watkins was just an arts education school that was established in Nashville. Man, I don't even know, like a long time ago, downtown Nashville. Was it even the 1800s? Or
Summers Randolph told me that his ancestor was the guy who founded it.
Yeah. And
so it goes way back.
Yeah, I did a talk at Watkins Watkins has now been swallowed by Belmont University. I was there recently doing a book talk there, and there's a photo on the wall of the founder, and it looks like Willem Dafoe in like Nosferatu or something. it looks like it's an old photograph, right?
Wow.
So let's say the turn of the 20th century is like around the time that place gets established. And it was just an art school. And at the time, like in the early 90s, it was a place where essentially like, oh, you're a retiree and you want to do some plein air painting, well, you can go down there and learn the basics of oil painting, you know, or you're a young kid and you didn't graduate and you're trying to get your GED, well, you can go to Watkins and get some credits for doing art, you know what I mean? Things like that. It was a very basic school. Some of the people I talked to said that the only reason it even was able to stay open was because in the summer they would do this big summer camp, and like that would be a big moneymaker for them because everybody was just unloading their kids, like go paint for the afternoon, you know what I mean? So that would keep the whole program going. But it was, that was all it really was. And again, in the early 2000s, this group of people who was there said, well, let's turn this into a baccalaureate program. Let's make this a proper college, and started working on that. And the cool thing that happened was, and this is something that doesn't usually happen in a lot of art schools, but with many art schools or even art departments at all the different schools we have in Nashville nowadays, you don't even necessarily, they're sort of closed in, you know what I mean? Like there's a gallery on campus and, we show our work there and our studios are there on campus and we do our thing. And the greater art scene doesn't really know about what's happening with the students at Vanderbilt, let's say, or something like this. But with the Watkins kids, because so many of their faculty were also involved with places like The Fugitive and stuff like that, then they would just start showing up, you know what I mean? Right. And they would also give them assignments. They'd say, hey, there's an opening on Saturday night at The Fugitive. I expect you all to be there, and blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden, all these art school kids started just being very present in the art scene. Yeah. And they were learning the same lessons everybody else was learning, including you don't have to wait for permission. You can just do this, So they started getting really active, and there was groups like the Secret Show group, right? That started doing these exhibitions that essentially they wouldn't really tell anybody about. You had to kind of just hear about it, like word of mouth, and that for a minute. And then they started then it became a thing that everybody was really interested in. So they kept calling it Secret Show, but then there'd be emails and things, and they'd send out little postcards and stuff. But that was very much those kids responding to what was happening in the art scene, and their faculty, their teachers telling them, don't wait for me, go ahead and do it, and before you know it, these kids are putting on shows all over town, and they're asking the professors, hey, would you like to be on our show? And the professors are like, oh, can I? Would it be okay if I put some of my art in your show? So they really turned the tables on the whole dynamic, of when you graduate, maybe you can be a real artist or something like that. And I think to this day, you see so much of the Watkins has a gallery at the packing plant, where the radio station is, where this is a building in Nashville where there's several small galleries, and there's the Riseology shop, a little print shop and stuff. Great creative building with lots of cool stuff in it, including WXNA community radio, and Open Gallery is there as well, which is an offshoot of the art program at Lipscomb University. So Nashville's art scene is very much a place where the students are swimming in the water. They're here with everybody else right now. And, they could have a big artist opening at Zeitgeist on Saturday night, and right across the street, there's some freshman hanging his first painting on the wall. You know what I mean? And I love that. I love the way Nashville's sort of these various art departments and schools in town have just become a natural part of the art scene in such a great way. And I think Watkins really led the charge on that.
Right. It kind of democratized the art scene.
It really
just
did.
Like the internet democratized journalism.
Yeah, they really did.
It's a thing of its time.
Yeah. I think so. And I think just the whole postmodern thing has helped too, because it helped as well with I was just getting a text telling me that Marlos Ivan is having some kind of an event at Elephant, and Marlos graduated from Watkins, but Marlos is just now going to go get his MFA, right? Well, Marlos is a well-known artist, not only in Nashville, but people know who Marlos is all over the country, and that never would have happened back in the 90s. You as an artist with no MFA or anything like that, there would just be no opportunity for you here, But now somebody like Marlos can build a whole career before he even gets his MFA,
Wow. Well, this is a little bit different, but you do write about it, so I wanted to talk about it. But talk to me a little bit about the importance of Nashville as a center of printmaking. and how that kind of focuses in on art, because that's something that's worldwide significance.
Yeah. Well, that gets into what you were talking about earlier with like the music industry and stuff. So Jim Sheridan, who for years ran the Hat Show print, I think he still has some kind of title, emeritus, something, master printer emeritus or something. But he is a super character. He's like one of the most colorful characters in the Nashville art scene, and he was a blast to talk to about this whole history. But he talked to me about the fact that it really came down to the music industry. So back in the day, before we had recorded music, the music business consisted of publishing. That's why we still have music publishing nowadays, because it used to be just that. That was the music industry, and the big hits of the day were songs that people wrote that you could buy on a piece of paper and
play on your piano,
and you'd play on your piano at home, and the neighbors would come over and you'd do a little jamboree. You know what I mean? And that was your entertainment.
Popular hymn book or whatever.
That's right. That's right. And it was basically Nashville became a center for music publishing, which meant we needed a printing industry, right? So that became a thing. And then, of course, the whole rest of the music industry starts to happen after that, because it's like, well, now we've got, microphones and antennas. It's like, where should these go? It's like, maybe down here where they have all the publishing, And then now we have recording equipment. What should we do with that? Take it to the radio guys down in Nashville, So the whole thing grew out of publishing, which, it goes hand in hand with printing. So Bryce McLeod is a well-known, designer and printmaking artist here in Nashville, and he talked a lot about the fact that even when he was getting started, that downtown in Nashville, Printers Alley is a famous area in Nashville, and that was literally it's called Printers Alley because there was a whole printing industry based around there. And then there was another part of town where he's located in an area that we now call Pie Town. I think Bryce actually came up with that name. And when he was moving into that area, he said that a lot of that old printing world was still there, like these old shops where he could still get the ink and all of the technical, I don't even know what it's all called, but all this like weird shops where they just sold stuff for printing and were still in business, even though they were sort of on the way out, but there was a whole center for that here. And of course, Hat Show Print was this, oasis, I guess you could call it, of antique technology in terms of like letterpress printing and all of the gear and everything they had there. And people like Bryce had an uncle who worked at the Tennessee State Museum. And because he was a curator at the museum, his job was basically to run all over the South and find weird things that might, or at least in Tennessee, might end up, being something that they should have in the museum. And so his whole thing was he got obsessed with this old printing equipment, right? And he just basically started getting that stuff into the museum. And then when they had too much of it, he just started taking it home. Wow. He'd find all this old stuff and put it in his. Bryce was like, oh, he had printing presses in the hallway and everything else, the big heavy machinery, and that's really how he got started. Was all that stuff ended up with him, and a lot of the letterpress stuff that's happening all over the country is the same thing. All this old equipment got pushed aside because all the new fancy stuff was better and cheaper and worked faster and all this kind of stuff. And he tells the story now about all these artists, who is basically like, hey, if you can haul this thing out of here, you can have it, that kind of thing. And now they're turning around and selling that equipment back to the same universities who are like, they want to have that at the art department now, And it's like, okay, well, it's $10,000, So that's another part of it too, is that, I think a lot of it has to do with the publishing and the printing industry in Nashville, but also in Tennessee, the whole craft side of thing. That's another thing we talk about in that chapter of the book, is like the transformation of the idea of printing as a craft versus printing as an art, right. and how did that change and why did that change? And I really think in a lot of ways we owe the printmaking world. We owe the printmaking world of Nashville a lot, because I think for a lot of people who came into the art world, I think the printing stuff for a lot of them was the sort of the cheese in the trap. They didn't necessarily jive with like I don't really get what this abstract painting is or this weird video you have on projecting on the wall, but this is a cool poster. You know what I mean?
That is cool.
And all of a sudden, like, they went from being somebody who could appreciate graphic design to be somebody who could appreciate art, and I think a lot of that was due to the printmakers in Nashville.
Yeah. Well, if the 90s were our Renaissance, our do-it-yourself Renaissance, how would you describe the art scene today?
Today, in a lot of ways, it's changed. I think one of the hugest differences was that DIY thing, as we just talked about with Wedgwood Houston, it was able to happen. The biggest reason was because there was places to do it. There was square footage available. There was empty buildings. There was venues that would be willing to do something weird and unusual. There was places available. That was the big thing. We're now in Nashville. Is there a square foot of anything available anywhere for $1?
And as always, you anticipate my next and final question, because I want to keep you here all day. Could such an art renaissance happen now in the 2020s? Because what I keep hearing about from artists is that they are finding it harder to afford to live here.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. And it's actually interesting because one of the things that's going on right now is like the art scene has become so spread out, right? Mm-hmm. Like it used to be like, there's this place downtown, then now there's also this stuff happening in Wedgwood, Houston. But now it's like there's art things happening all over Davidson County, right? So the whole county is filled up, and now there's like a whole cadre of artists who are living out like in the area that I'm in. I'm in Old Hickory now, and there's a whole bunch of artists like in Donaldson and Hermitage and all this stuff. Which, for anyone who doesn't know, these are all like essentially suburban communities around, technically around Nashville, even though we're all in the county. When people tell me, well, you don't really live in Nashville because you're in Old Hickory, I'm like, you want to pay my property taxes? Right. Because you're welcome to do, because I'm definitely paying those Nashville property taxes. But so it's all become very spread out and getting to the point where it's like people are like, I'm going to move to Wilson County, I'm going to move further out because the prices are just pushing people away. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a huge impediment. At the same time, it's the opportunities that are here now are so much more than there used to be.
Right.
That's the other side of the coin, is that, well, if you can come here and you can afford to stay here, there's a lot more that you can like sink your teeth into and find yourself involved in than there used to be. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's just how it goes. Like if it's a cool happening place with lots of artistic stuff happening, it's sooner or later it's that whole thing where now Chuck Close has to move. You know
right.
what I mean?
Okay. Yeah. Well, Joe Nolan, the author of Nowville, The Untold History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. Great book, Vanderbilt University Press. Thank you so much for joining us here at Mac Talk.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, you were great. Thank you.
You've been listening to Mac Talk from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you're interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guest today was Joe Nolan, author of the book Nowville, The Hidden History of Nashville's Contemporary Art Scene. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. I'm Kennedy Galpin. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.